Hello, everyone. I'm Butch Pahani from the UN Environment Program. Thank you for your resilience. Thank you for your sustainability. No amount of technical glitches will prevent us from doing this second edition of the Tobacco-Free Finance webinar of UNEP Principles for Sustainable Insurance and Tobacco-Free Portfolios. So we have our all-star cast today of speakers. We have Dr. Vinayak Prasad of the WHO, Denis Duverne, Chairman of AXA, Lars Guran Oraval, the CIO of Scandia, and last but not the least, Dr. Bronwyn King, CEO of Tobacco-Free Portfolios. Let's get going with a few scene-setting slides to paint the scene for everyone. So if we go back, Olivia, to the next previous one, let's just make sure that we'll try to see if we can do some of the polls. If we have time for that, if you want to participate in online polls, go to slido.com, enter the event code 65021, slido.com 65021, or scan the QR code. Next slide, please. So we are here because we're talking about sustainable development and what is the link with tobacco use. And sustainable development has three interlocking, mutually reinforcing dimensions of social, economic, and environmental. And whatever dimension it is, there is a cost on tobacco use. And that would be the 8 million that's killed every year, or the 1 billion premature deaths that's forecasted this century. And the people that will be killed 6 times more because more than COVID this year so far, child labor, the over 1 trillion in economic costs, and on the environmental agenda, pollution in our waterways and in our ocean, with cigarette butts being the world's most littered item, which is toxic and not biodegradable, all the way to biodiversity losses and deforestation and soil degradation. So on all counts, there is a cost on tobacco use. Next slide, please. And this is the reason why a couple of years ago, during the UN General Assembly, we launched the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge, which was developed by Tobacco-Free Portfolios, the PSI, the Principles for Responsible Investment, AXA, BNP Paribas, Natixis, and M Capital. And this pledge recognizes the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly good health and well-being, and the goal 17 on partnerships, but also the world's first global public health treaty, the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, adopted in 2003 and came into force in 2005. So that's a good 15 years ago. And so what this pledge shows is a demonstration of commitment by investors, by insurers, by banks to raise awareness on this issue across your activities, to adopt tobacco-free finance policies, to support the SDGs and the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and to guide a widespread transition towards tobacco-free finance. Next slide, please. And I know Bronwyn will reinforce this later on. 2 years after, we're very pleased that that initiative has grown to around 150 financial institutions around the world, supported by key stakeholder organizations like medical associations and other non-financial institutions. But the financial institutions represent 11 trillion in assets under management. On the lending side, corporate loan books of 2.6 trillion, and on the insurance side, premiums written of $268 billion. Next slide, please. If we go on to the next slide, a couple of months ago, we surveyed the global insurance industry on which SDGs they think to be the most important to the industry in the next 10 years. Let's go to the next slide, please. Good split around the world. Next slide, please. And the next slide will show you that, unsurprisingly, climate action is on top there, but not so far behind is good health and well-being. And if we remember that this was done in July, If we do the survey again, I won't be surprised if good health and well-being would be neck and neck with climate, if not even number one. Next slide, please. And so we have seen a lot of leadership from the insurance industry on different fronts, whether it's better climate risk assessment in the context of the insurance business and different climate change futures, developing the first ever ESG guide for the insurance business that every insurance company can refer to, or linking insurance products and solutions to different SDGs, or transitioning investment portfolios to net zero emissions by 2050. There's a whole lot of leadership from the insurance industry that we're seeing, particularly those that we are working with in the PSI. The next slide, please. But today is a very specific topic on tobacco-free finance, and the angle that we're taking is that insurers as risk carriers and risk managers and as investors, whether both sides of the house are to understand whether this is happening across insurance and investment portfolios, both of which are relevant to the insurance industry. So with that, let's move on to our discussion. And our first speaker, obviously, is the Global Authority on Health, the World Health Organization. And we'd like to hear from Dr. Vinayak Prasad from the WHO on the latest thinking on tobacco, on the tobacco agenda. Dr. Prasad, please go ahead and share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Butch. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Pleasure to be here. It's nearly almost 50 years since the World Health Assembly first recognized that tobacco leads to cancer. 50 years we have been aware that tobacco kills. At the moment, it's killing 8 million people every year due to cardiovascular diseases, lung disorders, cancers. It's also a risk for increase in diabetes. So it has its health consequences well established. And during COVID, the smokers are more at risk. So this has been very well documented in a number of studies in the last 4 months. And what we are seeing is that because of the nature of the COVID infection, which infects the lungs, the smokers are at risk of severe infection and the risk of higher mortality. And that is a huge problem. And this is the time to rethink the strategy for tobacco. And when I say rethink the strategy, we already have a commitment. 181 parties are committed to the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And in the UN SDGs, we do have the target 3A, which commits to strengthening the implementation of the FCTs. So the commitment already exists from all stakeholders. The WHO and UN have a strict policy of non-engagement with the tobacco industry. This not only comes from the FCTC, the Article 5.3 of the FCTC, but also in various decisions of the World Health Assembly and also in the UN General Assembly, which recognize that there is a conflict of interest between tobacco industry and any of the public health interventions in 2011. So to just make an overarching comment, it's not just the health consequences, but also as which his introductory remarks was that the economic and environmental damages far outweigh any perceived gains from tobacco. Any perceived gains from tobacco. Very well established, country by country, developed world, developing world country. So here are two key messages from me. One, of all the 1.3 billion tobacco users in the world, almost 500 million of them want to quit. Never a better time to quit. And this is the best time for all stakeholders, with the business community, the financial institutions, to rethink their investment. Rethink their investment in economic terms, look at the environmental damages, penalize the tobacco industry for all the damages which have occurred or are occurring till now. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Vinayak, for those thoughts. Can I just follow up with you? Because you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and many in the sustainable finance community are familiar, for example, with the Paris Agreement on Climate Change as a treaty. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is also a legally binding treaty, right?
That's right. It's a legally binding treaty with more than 180 countries that have signed to it, ratified it, acceded to it.
Thank you. So I think when people talk about Paris aligned investment portfolios or Paris aligned insurance portfolios, because the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is also part of the SDGs, then aligning yourself with the SDGs means aligning yourself with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control.
That's
So
right.
this is all one and the same. Everyone there in the sustainable finance community, whether you're a bank, insurer, investor, should know that aligning with yourself with SDG 3 means that you should also be aligning with the World Health Organization framework control on a convention on tobacco control. Thank you very much on that. I also wanted to check what are examples of that you're seeing with tobacco out there, with tobacco companies on their engagement on sustainability issues. What is the position of WHO on this? I mean, we see certain companies there promoting, providing a sustainability perspective of their business. But I think it would be interesting to hear from the WHO on how you perceive such actions.
Thank you, Butch. Couple of thoughts. One, that when the SDGs was being negotiated, at this accord, this financing for SDGs, there's only one tax that finds reference. That's tobacco taxes. And ironically, it's the tobacco industry fighting to lower taxes during COVID times because they say people don't money to buy tobacco, so why don't you lower taxes? So it's totally contradictory to what everyone has agreed in the SDGs financing for development. That's my first thought. The second thought is that tobacco industry does not contribute to the economy, does not actually huge damages which are happening. And the more the countries are starting to realize it, they are starting to look at putting levies on the tobacco industry, be it taxation. And then, of course, those who work in the world of environment are aware that the European decision in the European Parliament is that by January of 2023, European countries will need to put in measures to either find a biodegradable filter, cigarette filter, or levy costs on the tobacco industry. So there is a time limit to it. So all the European countries will need to put costs and penalize in that. It's not just the cost of garbage collection; it's the cost of damages, the extra deforestation which is happening in Tanzania, for example, more than twice the rest of the African continent, or the other damages which is arising due to air pollution. So we need to look at in a holistic picture, and many countries are starting to do it. Many countries have started to move forward in very strong implementation of the treaty provisions, and there is progress. We've for the first time we've seen some decline, about 2 million less smokers. There's still long way to go, but we are seeing the bending of the curve happening, and we can make that shift now. This is the best time to do it.
Thank you so much. So on that note, let's move over to Denis Duverne, the chairman of AXA, who has been championing this agenda very strongly over the past few years and try to understand what is the thinking at AXA on this very important and timely issue. Denis, the floor is yours. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, I'm on mute now. Sorry. Yes. Good afternoon, Butch. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the chairman of AXA, which is a large insurance company with a balance sheet of roughly 900 billion euros and revenues of roughly 100 billion. We at AXA, we've had a purpose for a long time. Our purpose, as we express it now, is act for human progress by protecting what matters. And the topic of how we invest and who we insure has a long history. In 2007, we, under the pressure of NGOs, I have to say, we excluded investment in controversial weapons. And in 2015, just before the Paris Agreement, we decided to get out of tobacco, of coal, and also to stop insuring coal producers. This was not an easy decision because it was the first time we took a decision both on the investment side and on the insurance side. And we divested all of our coal investments and investments in energy manufacturer producers with more than 50% of coal. And we have strengthened that policy since then. So when I had the visit in 2016 of Dr. Bronwyn King, it was easy for me when she talked about the Framework Convention to say we have to decide to get out of tobacco, both on the insurance side and on the investment side, that this is what we did. It's completely consistent with our purpose. It's consistent with our ESG policies, and it was a decision that we took at the time. But based on the experience that we saw of other investors, and I'm thinking of CalPERS, we made that decision much earlier, back in 2001, I believe, and had seen the stock price of tobacco manufacturers continue to rise and CalPERS was challenged in court. We decided to take an active part in the coalition that was led by Bronwyn, tobacco-free portfolio. So I made calls to chairmen and CEOs of large investors, banks, pension funds in France and in Europe to get the coalition going, because it's only that way that I believe that we will be successful.
Thank you so much, Denis, for your leadership, for your indefatigable leadership. And I think this morning we found out that you can probably call a few more people because we were saying this morning that every country has an insurance association, every country has a financial regulator. Would you like to share, Denis, what are the next calls you're going to make, I think, to really champion this agenda? Because I thought it was very powerful that you actually mentioned that you were going to do that.
Yes. So when you think about it, our supervisors, our regulators are part of the government. And our government has signed and our parliament has endorsed the Framework Convention for on tobacco, and we didn't get any call from our supervisors and regulators on this topic, and I think I'm going to call them to ask them what they do, because it's part of their mission to make sure that the convention is implemented by all market participants.
Thank you so much, Denis, and I think we look forward to seeing the outcome of that. I think it just goes to show, just with climate change, for example, at some point it was environmental ministries, but at some point ministries of finance came into the picture. So climate finance came into the picture. I think it's going to be the same here. Health ministers talking to finance ministers, which oversee financial regulators and supervisors as well. So that seems to be an exciting development. And perhaps for those regulators, supervisors on this webinar right now, it would be interesting to think about what you are doing or what you can do to support this agenda. And before I go to Lars, Denis, just one last question for you. What has been the reaction from employees at AXA on this?
Well, our employees are very much engaged on the sustainability agenda that AXA is pursuing, and this is part of their, I would say, engagement and advocacy for the company for which they are working. And so our employees are really have applauded this move, and they are very happy that we've decided to go out of tobacco. They see that as a testimony to, I would say, the leadership that we can have on those societal issues.
Thank you, Denis. Let's move over from Paris. Let's go further north to Sweden, where we have Lars from Scandia, the CIO. Lars, please tell us the story at Scandia about tobacco. Lars, we couldn't hear you. You're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, it's so easy to to forget. Thank you very much. As you said, I'm CIO and head of asset management for Scandia, and maybe we are a small company compared to AXA and Denis, but we are actually one of the largest life insurance companies in the Nordic region. And in Sweden, I can say that the major part of all private pension is actually in the formal life insurance. So for that reason, our investment portfolio looks very much like a pension fund in the UK. Looking at tobacco, actually more than 20 years ago, in 1997, Scandia decided to divest from tobacco. And at that time, we were maybe the first, or at least one of the first, to do that. And at that time, this decision was controversial. And the decision was taken because of, at the time, there actually was a public outcry, and especially young people in Sweden had started to engage against the tobacco industry. And we are an insurance company with health insurance, so we know really that smoking do great harm. So for us, it seems to be a good decision to do that. And you can say this decision to be tobacco-free was the first step for us really to be a responsible investor. And then we have taken many steps, and Denis mentioned some of the things, controversial weapon, coal, and so on. And so this is for us the right way to go. And when we heard then about this tobacco-free finance pledge, it was a very easy decision to sign that pledge.
Thank you very much, Lars, for that. Can I just ask, I mean, as CIO, and the responsible investment movement has moved over the years. And one of the earlier topics around, I mean, tobacco is not a new topic for investors. It's been around for ages, in fact, for decades. And so there was this view that, excluding tobacco would lead to, underperformance and all of those things because you have a limited investable universe. What is your view as CIO in saying that is part and parcel of my fiduciary responsibility is not to be engaging in these things that have negative externalities, etc. Because there is still that view, perhaps some in the financial community who are still thinking along those lines.
And I agree that was really the argument you heard for many years, really, that if you can't invest in tobacco, you might give up on return. And I would say if you have a very narrow mandate, that might be the case. But for us, we have a total portfolio and a very well-diverse portfolio. We have plenty of investment opportunities. And I would say that maybe in our portfolio, we have maybe 4,000 companies invested in. So there is no risk at all that I mean, it's a problem that we say no to a couple of maybe 50 to 100 companies that we are not allowed to invest in. So that's not a problem any longer at all.
And how are you engaging with your peers in Sweden or the wider Nordic region on this agenda? Is something I assume that this is not simply a Scandia only initiative or to be part of, but are you talking to your peers about this?
You can say from the beginning we were quite alone. As I said, there were some others, actually institutional investors, that did the same decision as our in 1997. But I would say today, to be tobacco-free is consensus among at least Swedish institutional investors. There might be a few that invest in some parts of their portfolio in tobacco still, but otherwise this is not controversial any longer. And the reason for that is really that it's not only that you should be a responsible investor. Nowadays, everyone wants to be a sustainable investor, and then you really need to be responsible. And you must have to say that you, as a management, you have to focus on risk and return, but also that your investments are not doing harm or contribute to a negative. And you can't say you are a sustainable investor if you, to me, invest in tobacco.
Right. So in many ways, Lars, the agenda has been flipped in saying that as an investor, I'm not just integrating financially material ESG risks so that I can improve my performance. I'm also conscious of how my investments will impact the economy, society, and the environment. So this impact narrative seems to be getting clearer.
I would say I've been working with long-term asset management for more than 30 years. So I've seen so many changes in the capital markets and also new trends in the asset management business. This is actually one of the strongest trends I've seen really to sustainable investment really. And for that reason, you need to be tobacco-free.
Thank you, Lars. So let's go down under to Melbourne and hear from Bronwyn King. And perhaps, Bronwyn, I mean, for those who may be unfamiliar with you, she's a doctor and an oncologist. Perhaps it might be good to start with a bit of history on how you got into this space and to this movement that is now happening around the world.
Thanks so much for having me, Butch, and thanks to my fellow speakers for being here today. I should say it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne, so so to any Australians out there, a great big hello and great work on staying awake. So I am a doctor by background. I'm a radiation oncologist, and I spent my early years working on the lung cancer ward at a very big cancer hospital here in Melbourne. And I was really very clear on knowing that tobacco was bad. I knew, like everybody, that tobacco had a really bad impact on health, but it was seeing it myself up front for the first time in the front row of just a terrible, terrible occurrence in hospitals all over the world. And that is that tobacco has a dreadful impact on humans. And all of these people are brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. And as I started out in my medical career, I was the one who had to treat them. And despite living in a very lucky country with very sophisticated medicine, lung cancer is a terrible disease, and nearly all of my patients died. And many of them were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and I was the one who had to tell them that they weren't going to survive. I had to bring in their families to say goodbye, and it really hit me hard. And I just thought, it just is such an incredible problem, and yet it's something that can be fixed. This is completely preventable. And then 10 years later, when I was qualified as an oncologist, I made the discovery that my compulsory pension was investing some of my money in big tobacco. And that was just an incredible moment for me, because I thought it just makes no sense to spend all my time trying to help people and do everything I can to save them and to at least make them have a better quality of life. Yet on the other hand, I was investing my own money in the companies that make the products that were killing my patients. And so right then and there, my life really changed on the spot. And I've been trying ever since then to really build a bridge between the health sector and the finance sector on the issue of tobacco. And despite the finance sector doing so many great things on the issue of sustainability, tobacco, for some reason, has often been overlooked. It's often been a bit of a blind spot. And certainly at the moment, we're seeing so many financial organisations almost fall over each other, to outbid each other, to commit to net zero, and to commit to the Paris Agreement, and to commit to all of these great, really important initiatives. But for some reason, tobacco is often left out. So we've built a team around the world, and we really try to work really collaboratively and in good spirit with the finance sector to encourage them to have a discussion about tobacco, learn a little bit more, and instead of business as usual, to stand side by side with the global health sector and with all the parents out there, with all of the parents and the teachers who are trying to teach that next generation not to smoke. Stand alongside us and reject tobacco.
Thank you so much for your passion and leadership, Bronwyn. Can you tell us, since we've launched the tobacco-free finance pledge, what are the successes and what are the challenges that we continue to encounter these days that I think might be important? It's never an easy road. On the path to sustainability is always riddled with challenges. So it's the same for tobacco, but perhaps you can articulate a bit of that and what else we can do to champion this agenda of.
Yeah, great. Well, look, so as you mentioned, and you stole my thunder, Butch, I wanted to mention that today we've got 150 signatories of the Tobacco Free Finance Pledge, and together they've got assets under management of $11 trillion. So it's almost double the amount signed up to the pledge compared to when it was launched just 2 years ago. And once upon a time, it was hard to get health on the agenda when we were talking to financial institutions. But in the year of COVID, it's not so hard anymore, because suddenly everybody really realises very personally that without health, there is no wealth. And so these issues and discussions around health have really pushed their way up the agenda in financial organisations. So we're actually seeing a real increase in appetite for discussions around how to build a healthy portfolio. And clearly something that is sustainable must be tobacco free. And Butch, you mentioned, what are the struggles? So we have seen that the tobacco industry has pushed back very hard against this initiative and against sustainability initiatives in general. And what they've done is try to adopt the word sustainable and to try to adopt the concept of ESG and try to use the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course is as silly as it sounds. And so we really encourage people out there to be very sceptical. Tobacco companies have joined a whole range of sustainability initiatives. They are part of all sorts of sustainability groups. They have hired sustainability experts to work for them. They have sponsored a whole range of media events that are quite mainstream, and now they are appearing at very mainstream platforms alongside very well-respected people. So it just goes on and on, the way that they are trying to interfere with people's understanding of sustainability. But rest assured, the words sustainable and tobacco can never be in the same sentence.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. And I'm conscious, just on time management, we started, unfortunately, 20 minutes late because of technical issues. So we'll end 20 minutes later than the allotted time, but I'm conscious that WHO has to leave at top of the hour. So I'd like to pose a question for Vinayak that came in. And there's a question about tobacco companies are limited liability companies under law. Why not remove this protection on the grounds that they are socially destructive?
A good question. And I think it will be the law of the respective countries which will allow that action to happen. In a number of countries, class action suits have been filed. For example, in the US, the companies have paid up billions of dollars to then invest for tobacco control, to inform the adolescents and teenagers about the harms of tobacco. Similar court cases are going on in Canada and a couple of other countries. So I guess it's important. Article 19 of the FCTC allows for imposing liability on the tobacco industry, and it's possible for all of the parties to the FCTC to look at a comprehensive and a cohesive approach to fix them for what they have done or doing to society, both in terms of health, environment, and economic losses.
Okay, so homework for all who haven't read FCTC, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, please have a look. And I can also assure you that once you look under SDGs, you will find the FCTC target under the health goal number 3. Final question for you, Vinayak, because I just wanted to clear this because take advantage of the WHO being present. E-cigarettes and smoke-free alternatives. What is the position of WHO on these things, given that it's also getting more prevalent?
Thank you. I think those who were born in the 60s and 70s may remember the concept of light, mild, all of that. So the tobacco industry sold that, filters, and later, after 15 years, it emerged that there's no difference in terms of health outcomes for filter cigarette. Now, a difference in terms of light cigarettes, they're all actually more harmful. And then concept of new products, the so-called heated tobacco products, the industry likes to call it heat, not burn. They're actually quite harmful. They're all tobacco products. All forms of tobacco products are harmful. In terms of electronic cigarettes, electronic nicotine delivery devices, we know they are cardiotoxic, they damage the heart. We don't know the long-term effects of using e-cigarettes. So we can't say that things will improve. It's not known to be helping smokers to quit. So more and more younger people are taking to electronic cigarettes thinking these are safer products. They are not, they're harmful. So they may or may not be less harmful than cigarettes, but then smokers are got better options to use to help them to quit rather than to use e-cigarettes, which are not known to be very effective in terms of quitting. So that's where we are. In the WHO's position is to not allow for any regulatory carve-outs, not allow for any concessions. Governments may want to allow sale of these products, do it, no problem. Treat them like tobacco products, let it be in the market the way it is. If 30 countries have banned it, good, let them stay banned because they can't regulate these products, ban it. But if they want to get it in the market, it's a governmental decision, then they should not create any carve-out, treat them like any other cigarette or other tobacco products.
Thank you so much. And you heard it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. It came from the WHO. And so hopefully that also sheds light on that risk that's emerging very fast nowadays. So we've caught up a little bit with time, and I wanted to have the chance to check the pulse of the audience with our first online poll. If you could show the first question. Okay, some people have already answered. Did you know that UN Sustainable Development Goal 3 on good health and well-being has a specific target to strengthen the implementation of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in all countries? And so this morning, there was a big group who actually didn't know that. And still, 15 years after it came into force, there's still a chunk of financial institutions and stakeholders there who are unaware about the FCTC. And now, even with the SDGs, some people do not even know that there is a target on tobacco control. So that's insightful, and we will continue later on and see our other polls. Let's move on to Denis, and perhaps Denis, you can answer this other question. And I know you're headquartered in Paris, but you're a global insurer and a global investor. There's a question about what are insurance companies doing in countries where smoking rates are still high and tobacco is state-owned, for example, in China. But perhaps I thought you might be able to shed some AXA perspective, given that you also have business in China.
Thank you, Butch. Yes, we do operate in roughly 60 countries, including China. We, I mean, as part of the of our business, health insurance is a significant portion of our business, and we don't want just to pay claims to our policyholders. We also want to be a partner to our policyholders, and therefore, in many of our, I mean, in all of our geographies, we have around our health insurance policies preventative measures, advice, health advice to our customers, health advice platforms and applications. And in Asia in particular, we have a platform called Emma, which is an electronic assistant to our policyholders, and we give them well-being advice, including advice on not smoking. So, in fact, in spite of the fact that in a number of countries, tobacco is a state monopoly and the tobacco company is state-owned, we keep giving advice to our policyholders not to smoke to preserve their health.
Right. So, Denis, in other words, what you're saying is that the policy on tobacco at AXA is a global policy. There's basically no exception there.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. And I just wanted to check, I mean, since we've caught up a little bit with time and have the chance to look at the second online poll, because I think we don't want to simply do an event. We also want to shape our agenda going forward. Has your company gone tobacco-free in its insurance and or investment portfolios? And so please answer that. You need to go to slido.com and enter the event code 65021. And the choices are investment only, insurance only, insurance and investment, or neither of the two, or you don't know. And even in the first session this morning, we actually got a bunch of folks who said they don't know. And so perhaps if you are working in an insurance company, it's definitely worthwhile to ask how is your company addressing this issue, both in your investment and insurance portfolios. And as we're waiting for the results to come in, I thought we should continue the discussion and go a little bit deeper. Lars, perhaps you can enlighten us a little bit. So one of the tools of responsible investors is active ownership and engagement. And so some people have posited that, there is a transition in tobacco, but others have said like, no, there is no transition because it's harmful as intended. So what is the view what's your view on this, on active ownership and tobacco?
I say we are very much positive to engagement, and we think that's necessary and very important. But concerning tobacco, it's very difficult to see how a tobacco company can improve, really. Then they have to change their product, really. And the same is really with coal. I mean, you can't really improve it. So there we don't think that it's impossible, really, with engagement.
Right. And Bronwyn, did you want to add here, because you have been also discussing with different financial institutions around the world, what has been the perception on this, debate, on some people thinking that a few there might say like there is a transition possible, but perhaps you might enlighten us a little bit on how those discussions are coming into being.
Sure. Well, look, I think when it comes to engagement in the tobacco industry, we really do need to emphasise what Vinayak from the World Health Organization just explained, which is that the World Health Organization and the United Nations more broadly has and recommends an absolute non-engagement policy with tobacco companies. And that's based on the fundamental irreconcilable conflict of interest between the tobacco industry and the human right to life, and the tobacco industry and the human right to health. So there's really nowhere to go. And as Lars Goren just explained, there is no productive engagement that can occur because tobacco kills. There is no safe level of the product. So, if you hypothesize and said, okay, well, what could we do? The problem is the only thing you want is for them to completely cease business. So there's nowhere to go there. And in terms of, the tobacco industry pushing back against that, which they really have done very much, by all means, they can talk about all sorts of other things like, improving diversity on the board, or improving CEO compensation transparency, or improving all sorts of different things. There's a fundamental conflict with the core business, which is tobacco. Tobacco kills. So, it's a really black and white issue, and that's why we encourage in this very specific situation an exclusion policy to apply.
Thank you. And Denis, having been engaging with AXA, I know that, as an investor, you also exercise active ownership, but as an insurer, you're also employing this agenda of insurer engagement and using your insurance influence as a risk carrier to drive this agenda. Would you like to explain a little bit more that angle of AXA?
Yes, just before that, on this topic of engagement with the tobacco industry, we are on the same line. And I will take the analogy of energy producers. In the case of energy producers, we told them in 2016, we divest from energy producers if you have more than 50% of coal, and we engage with the ones that were below 50% but still too high in our view, and then we moved to 30%. So our engagement was a way to warn them and give them a little bit of time to reduce, and they can go to zero while continuing to produce electricity. In the case of tobacco, I don't think it makes any sense. We believe that we have to have the same policy on investment as on insurance. So at the same time as we decided to divest from tobacco manufacturers, we decided to stop insuring them, because, as you said, there are two sides to our balance sheet, and we need to be consistent. And we have stopped insuring tobacco manufacturers completely, the only exception being employee benefits, because we didn't want to harm their employees.
Right. So basically, the AXA policy on insurance looks into physical assets that manufacture tobacco. But for people working, you will continue. There are employee benefits that will continue to be provided, and so this is, I guess, a social angle and a sort of just angle that AXA is taking on. Could help the people, regardless of where they work. There will be, as they move on and look for other opportunities, but the facilities itself is something inconsistent with the AXA policy,
yes,
right?
Absolutely, that's right.
Right. So on that note, it might be worthwhile to look into our and just see the results for our second question, and then we move on to our third question. So this is a question that has to be asked. So for those of you who are listening and who don't know, please start asking whether what is your company's policy if you're an insurance company on tobacco. I think it's clear for AXA and Scandia, but for other companies there, I'm not too sure. And a big bunch also have said that they are not doing anything across their entire balance sheet. So let's move on to the third question and see where we are in terms of the challenge. I mean, AXA is one of a handful of companies who have probably transitioned to tobacco-free across investment and insurance, but we still want to check the pulse of folks there on what they think is more challenging. And the whole idea here is to understand how we can support and guide that transition in line with the tobacco-free finance pledge, that we want to see guide a widespread transition. And so there has historically been more movement on investment, and it seems like increasingly there is a need for guidance on how to do it on insurance. And I have to say that this is not specific to tobacco. We asked exactly the same question about net zero carbon emissions. And even though there has been big progress on transitioning investment portfolios to net zero, there has been very little. There's no framework for net zero insurance portfolios yet. And it seems like it's the same case for tobacco. There's more movement on investment, even though there's a lot to improve. But this, again, validates that there probably needs to a bit more work on insurance. And on that note, Bronwyn, do you want to share some of the next key steps that we'd like to take forward? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, our call to action today is for any insurers out there that haven't had the tobacco-free discussion to really consider putting that on the agenda and having a dialogue and reaching out to others that perhaps have done it, or reaching out to us at Tobacco-Free Portfolios, and we'd be very happy to share some experience and share some ideas from around the world. But to those insurers that have gone tobacco-free or are on the tobacco-free journey and have some experience, we would love to reach out to you to see if you would consider joining us in a collaboration with the Principles for Sustainable Insurance to develop some collaborative guidelines, some best practice guidelines around how to go tobacco-free if you are an insurer, looking at, as Denise said, looking at both sides of the balance sheet and what that means.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and we look forward to working with you on that. Perhaps as we wind the webinar right now, I want to make sure that we respect the time and we finish as we said we'll finish, which is we have 10 minutes. I'll just make sure that folks have a last chance to weigh in. Lars, we've heard you've heard from your peer Denis at AXA, and also from Bronwyn, and also the WHO. What are the things that we can do? It seems like there has been big progress on this, and yet there's still so much to do. So how can we amplify these efforts? We know that there is this initiative going, but what are your thoughts in order to help raise the ambition on this and make sure that this is not an issue that not only the present generation, but future generations will suffer from going forward?
I think that this sustainable investment is so important, and I think everyone demands it. Really, it's not just. Our insurers, our clients, is really saying to us, you need to be a sustainable investor, and also the legislation is not moving in the same direction. We have the disclosure coming really, so we really have to show what we are doing also. And if you want to be a sustainable investor, then you also need to be a responsible investor, and then you need to be tobacco free.
Okay, thank you for those words of wisdom, Lars. So responsibility goes hand in hand with sustainability and the other way around. You can't be sustainable if you're responsible, and to be sustainable, you need to be responsible. And so thank you for that. Denis, any parting shot for your peers around the world listening here today?
So I have to say I'm humbled by what Lars-Göran said, because 1997 was 16 years before we went tobacco free. So congratulations on what you achieved. I'm also grateful to Bronwyn King, because she was the one that moved us in that direction, and I'm really grateful for that. And I know that I still have a lot of work ahead of me, because I need now to make a call to our regulators and supervisors to amplify the movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Denis. So Denis is true to form, is a man of action, and there's no time wasted. So we'll make sure that you get the regulator on the line after this webinar. Bronwyn, please, last word from you as we close the webinar and forge ahead on this agenda.
Yeah, I think, look, two things, if I may. One is to just pick up a little on what Lars-Göran was saying earlier. Tobacco, on a purely financial basis, had done quite well if you look at the first 15 years of this century. But we have seen since 2016-17 a very dramatic change in the financial performance of tobacco companies, with very, very significant drops in share price. Sort of 40 to 60% drop in share price in the past 3 years. So you do not need tobacco in your portfolio to do well financially. In fact, it's been quite the opposite of late. So that's one thing to note. But the second sort of takeaway message is, please scrutinise your products that are labelled as ESG or sustainable, because some of them have very strange or curious methodologies, and tobacco has slipped into many ESG products. It should not be there. There should not. It really should be a baseline standard, and we have advocated with many groups internationally to encourage products that are labelled sustainable or labelled responsible or labelled ESG to have tobacco-free as a baseline. So we all have a lot of work in front of us, but we look forward to continuing to collaborate and to build a tobacco-free world.
Thank you, Bronwyn, from down under to up and over. Getting us up and over, and that is going to be our objective over time. And I think for me, my final thinking is that everyone these days, even the most, you could say, most active financial institutions that are sustainable finance have been trumpeting many things. One of them are the SDGs. So this is one way to align yourself with the SDGs, as you are doing with the Paris Agreement. And case in point, Scandia, AXA, they're doing it. There are others that need to follow that. Second jargon in sustainable finance, science-based targets. Everyone is talking about science-based targets, whether on climate and biodiversity. We have the science and evidence in front of you on tobacco. what else do we need in order to move the agenda further? So when you talk about science-based targets, consider the science and weight of science behind tobacco use. And I think on that note, I think we can have a clearer perspective. And this webinar goal was to demystify tobacco. And we hope from our speakers today and the science, the weight of science and policy and financial action, that we have somewhat cleared the smoke and cleared the fog on this issue and make it visibly clear and crystal clear for everyone that to be sustainable on insurance and investment means, in a tobacco context, going tobacco free. So we look forward to this journey with all of you. We hope that you will join and sign the Tobacco Free Finance Pledge. And on that note, we want to make sure that as we are in front of the pandemic, listen to the WHO's advice. This is a no-brainer. With COVID and the pandemic, don't do yourself self-inflicted by continue. For those who are still smoking, this is the least that you can do. One of the things you can do to make yourself resilient to the pandemic. And I think this is, for those who are continuing smoking, this is a good time to really think about this agenda. And for financial institutions there, it's really the good time to really understand how responsible and sustainable are you. On that note, stay safe, everyone, and wishing you all the wealth of good health.